1, 2. Can you all hear? Can you hear me down here? Can you hear me upstairs? Hey.
That'll be a lot easier, that.
Okay.
At least
What we're going to do is we're going to start with a little magical mystery tour of lesbian Liverpool.
Without further ado, I want you to fasten your metaphorical seat belts. And we're going to go on a Barbara Brownskirt tour of the invisible lesbians of Liverpool. Judy is in the gay village.
My name's Joan, I'm from Liverpool Traies, and I'm actually really hugely honoured to have been asked by Homotopia to introduce this evening. And I don't know about you, but going past the Lisbon on a vintage bus, it's probably one of the moments of my life, and I can die happy now. So just a few thank yous. Thanks to Homotopia. Thanks to our speakers, I'll introduce in a second. Thanks to lovely Jan and everybody at Red Brick Vintage. And thanks to yourselves for coming on what really is a journey. This is pretty much the last day of events for Homotopia, and I hope you'll agree it's been absolutely amazing. So huge thanks to Shah and Josiah and everybody involved, Gary, everyone this year. It's been a really fantastic festival. And I think it's been, it's so timely that to be examining our history this year. So obviously this event is all about looking back over the last 50 years or so and seeing what that's meant, particularly for us as lesbians. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our 3 speakers this afternoon, and they will each in turn stand up and present to you their thoughts and works. And then we'll have a chance for you to ask questions, and we'd really love it to be a debate. So what I'm looking at you now, I was sat there really quietly, is I'm expecting a near riot.
I'm going to cause some riots in a moment,
come on
I think.
in. So near riot, loads of questions. Don't be shy. I can't imagine. Oh, lovely. I can't imagine that anybody who's just been on that bus journey hasn't got something they want to say about their own experiences here in the city or further afield. So don't be shy, jump in, and feel free to be as controversial as you like, because we like a bit of controversy. We are Liverpool after all. That'll be really great. So our 3 lovely panellists this afternoon are going to come this way, back towards me. First of all, Sandi Hughes, who is an award-winning filmmaker, historian and artist, who's been documenting activists and LGBT+ life in Liverpool since the 1970s. Her recent work, Planet Tumbleweed, The Light of the Female Species, has travelled to festivals throughout the UK, including Flare, the London LGBT Film Festival, which meant it was seen by people from all across the globe. And most recently, she's also been working with Liverpool-based organisation Redoc, working to digitise her extensive film and photography archive. And when I say extensive, Sandi has been documenting lives here in Liverpool for 40 years in the most extraordinary way. So the reason that we know some of our history here is thanks to Sandi. Centre, we have Jane Traies, who's a writer, teacher and leading researcher exploring the lives of older lesbian women in the UK. She's a research associate in the Centre for Cultural Studies at the University of Essex, and she's contributed to a number of publications in this field, but her current book is The Lives of Older Lesbians, Ageing, Sexuality and the Life Course. So we've got an expert amongst us here about how we become more marvellous as we get older. And finally, we have Frances Bingham, who describes herself as a freelance writer based in London. She's just recently had her play, The Blue Hour of Natalie Barney, playing at the Arcla in London. It's only just finished, starring Amanda Boxer. It's a one-woman kind of exploration of Natalie Barney. Her other works include her novel, The Principle of Camouflage, poetry, she's a performer, and she will be reading to you today, and also a writer on great lesbian lives, people like Maureen Duffy, and most famously producing an edited volume of Valentine Ackland's poetry. Sorry, I'm really stumbling there. Called Journey from Winter, and Frances is also going to read from that as well. So I'd love you to give a huge round of applause for each of our panellists. And then it just remains to ask who'd like to go first. Great.
I'll go first. I love going first because I like to get everything out before anyone else, so that I don't need to copy them. You in the glasses at the back, can you hear what I'm saying? Yeah. No, it's all right. 50 years liberation. 50 years ago I was 24. I had 4 children. I was married to a guy from the Navy. Only saw him about 2 or 3 times a year. Every year I had a baby. So they were all at home for a year, up till they were 4, staying at home and all that. Back then, what was going on was, when you got married, I'll start from when I was a teenager, because it's really important what you're up to when you're younger. When I was a teenager, I was at school. You left school when you were 16. You had a job for about, say, 2, 3, 4 years, and then you got married. That was the system. You got married. If you didn't get married, you were called a spinster. And being called a spinster, it was really bad in them days. So I got married to the first man who told me that he loved me. I'd been brought up in a kids' home. I didn't know who my mother and father was. I got fostered out before I was a teenager, and then I got married. So up until when the 50 years started, so I was 24, I've got 4 kids, taking them to school in a year's time, all that one. And I got a job in the Lisbon in 1970. I didn't know what it was about, but the manageress who was running the Lisbon pub, she said to me, you'll be all right, you get a few puffs in here, but they don't bother you. So I was like, yeah, all right. I knew about gay people, didn't know I was one then, but I knew I liked women more than men on a personal level. Anyway, the first night I'm working in the Lisbon, you got people from all over Liverpool coming to drink in there, especially from the docks. The docks was full on then. You get people from all over the world. And so I'm there behind the bar, pulling pints like that. And these 3 boys came in. I knew they were gay because one was beautiful. He had makeup on. Another one had a V-neck top, V-neck jumper on with a cleavage. And the other one, had short back and sides. And most men had short back and sides then. Women didn't. So anyway, they come to the bar and I asked them what they wanted, and at the time, I'm in hot pants. This is the 70s, remember? Bright orange, dead tiny shorts, a lovely royal blue top, all made out of crimpline, and I loved them. And these 3 gay boys are watching me going backwards and forwards and all that. And one of them said, Gives a go of your hot pants, girl. I went, no, you get your own. And as I was turning to go to the till, to put the money in the till, I heard one of them say, yeah, they're lovely hot pants, pity about the road maps. So I come round back to the bar, and there was only one person there. I said, what did he mean by that? Road maps, what does that mean? And this lad says, you've got varicose veins, love, and they're all up your legs. Well, I was shocked, and I was like that. Hey, who said that? I was taking necking it by then. I was hating them. Well, who said that? Who said that? And then I thought, at the same time I was laughing, I thought it was really funny. And I thought, oh no, I shouldn't be laughing at myself. But then that was the first time that I ever laughed at myself of something that somebody saw. So as time went on, I was realising, yeah, I'm gay, I'm like them. I don't look like them or talk like them or anything like that, but I feel like them. They made everything sound funny. No matter how drastic or dramatic it was, they made a joke out of it. Gay boys, this is mainly. And the sad thing about it was, when I left the matrimonial home, I got my daughters taken off me. I was told I was an unfit mother, even though I'd been a mother for 6 years, on my own because the father was at sea. And a female judge said, yeah, you're unfit to mother your daughters, but you can have custody of your son. Well, that mashed me head up because I thought, what? Why should I just be a mother to my son and not my daughters as well? It took me years to understand what a foul brain that woman had anyway. So I had to reinvent myself. I'm working in the bar. The woman who gave me the job in the bar, she was a neighbour. And when I came out, she sacked me because I was gay. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit harder than I thought. But one of the really strong things that I can always appreciate was I still had my mothering instincts. I missed mothering my daughters. I left my son with my daughters because I didn't want to break them up. They were such a tight family. And I was aware then that I've still got these mothering skills. And there was young gay boys coming to the pub, 14, 15, even some younger. And when the pub finished, they'd go down to what was called, where the River Mersey is. I can't remember the name of it now. But anyway, at the pier head it was anyway. And there was a caravanette there, and it sold bacon butties and cups of tea like that, So we'd all go down there when the pub finished, or the club as well. And I was really aware of young gay boys being on the street, didn't have anywhere to go, they'd been kicked out the family. It was so full on in the 70s of gay people. If you come out, you got sacked even, especially in establishments like hospitals or places like that. So I'd say to the gay boys, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to sleep? Said, oh, we just sleep on the bench here and that. I said, well, I've got a flat. I've got a 2-bedroom flat. You can come back and have a kip. I'll do a scram for you. Don't be just walking the streets and prostituting yourself, all that one. So I got to be still playing a mother, but to these young gay boys. So it sort of made me feel quite different about what had been going on in my life, because I only had custody once a month to my kids, once a month where I lived, and once a month I had to go to their dad's house because he won custody and that. But when I look back, I've only gone as far as the 80s, there's an awful lot more to tell you, but it just made me aware that if you're different, stay different. Don't just mix in with everyone else, because otherwise you're not being you. And like bringing you right up to 2017, things have changed a lot, a lot on a level where you're allowed to be who you are and what you can do and all that. But don't thank the powers that be, because we've always fought to be who we are. We didn't, well, the guys I know, they didn't stop having sex because it was illegal. You had to be over 21, the men, to have sex, and it was like, as if we can't do anything like that because we're not 21. So don't be too thankful for the powers that be, because we were doing it anyway.
Dear, case of follow that. Wow. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for inviting me to come all this long way. And it's brilliant to be in Liverpool. I think I'm here for 2 reasons probably. One is because I actually remember 1967, like Sandi, and that I think I might just ask, anybody in the audience who remembers 1967? Yeah. Yay, thank you. Anybody who was alive in 1967? Yeah. Okay. Okay, that gives me a feel. The other reason I'm here is that people who remember 1967 are actually getting thinner and thinner on the ground, and the work that I do is very largely oral history work with women, normally women born before 1950, who identify as lesbians. So I go around interviewing these people and hearing their life stories, and I've got to say my little recorder is in my bag wherever I go, and I nearly whipped it out while Sandi was talking because that's such a brilliant story. I'd like to collect her, but I expect somebody else has done that already. These are important, these stories, because of the way in which people of our generation very often didn't speak out, lived their lives in the closet. Those stories disappear. They go to their grave with the woman who died, and we don't know them. So I go around collecting stories, and the oldest person I've interviewed so far was born in 1919, and her story is very different, therefore, from perhaps somebody of my generation. So, what do I want to say to you about 1967? Well, 1967 was the year I started work, and so I can remember it quite well, and I can remember how very, very different it was. And when you say, where were all the lesbians in 1967? Well, the first short answer is, they were there, but they were all hiding. Because, by and large, for the sort of reasons that Sandi's told you, people tended to be in the closet. Now, when I talk about my work, I very often get somebody in the audience, when there's any questions, and somebody in the audience, almost always, and I'm afraid it is always a man, says, what you've got to realise, Jane, is that lesbians never had such a bad time as gay men because they weren't illegal. And when I've calmed down, I think it's not strictly true. Lesbians were not likely to be sent to jail. But beyond that, they shared all the stigma, all the homophobia, all the discrimination that was current at the time. And if you kept quiet, you had a little bit of a chance of not having that happen to you. But if your sexuality was discovered, there were all kinds of bad things that might happen. You might get rejected by your family and thrown out, and your parents never want to speak to you again. You might get on receiving end of physical or sexual violence. You might be sacked from your job, as we've just heard. And you might, as an unfit mother, as all lesbians were at that time, be deprived of the custody of your children. So it wasn't exactly an easy ride. The other thing about lesbians in 1967, I think, is that it wasn't just that they were hiding, but they were kind of obscured in their identity because nobody talked about it. Everybody knew that lesbians existed, but nobody talked about it. And there was actually a reason for this, and it was that there was a very strong belief at the time that if young women found out that there was such a thing as lesbianism, they would do it, and that would be a bad thing. And so it was better not to mention it, and then they'd never find out, and they'd never do it. And the result was that we didn't know, most of us, anything about it. As Sandi said, you grew up, you got married, possibly, or you wondered why you wouldn't want to get married, and nobody gave you the word for it. In fact, one of the women I interviewed said that she and her school friends, when they were about 14, had heard the word lesbian, and they sort of thought they wanted to know what it meant, so they looked up in the dictionary. They never found it because they were looking up lesbian instead of lesbian. They didn't even know how to spell it. And that determination on the part of the whole society to keep girls in ignorance was very much part of the 1950s and 60s. It was actually the reason, in the end, that we were never illegal. Because I don't know whether you know that there was an Act of Parliament in 1921 which was to make lesbianism illegal just like sex between men. And it got all the way to the House of Lords. It got through the Commons, and it was only thrown out in the House of Lords because somebody made a very persuasive speech saying exactly what I've just said to you, that it would be best if we didn't mention it out loud, because if young women heard about it, this vice might spread. And that's the only reason really that we weren't illegal. So, in 1967, there was a bit more talk about it all, because it became very clear during sort of 66 into 67 that the law was going to change. It had taken 10 years since Wolfenden, but it was going to happen. And so lesbians and gays got a bit of media attention around 1967, which they hadn't had before. And in particular, and I'll tell you this because it's on YouTube, and if you're interested you can go and watch it, there was a documentary TV series in those days called Man Alive. And they screened a couple of programmes in the June of that year called The Consenting Adults. And the first one was called The Consenting Adults, the Men, and the second one was called The Consenting Adults, the Women, and it was about lesbians. And the subtitle of the film about the lesbians was, Can a lesbian ever find true happiness? Which obviously is a question expecting the answer no, and tells you quite a lot, I think, about what was going on at the time. So there's only one other thing that I'd like to throw into the debate before I sit down, because I can go on forever, and I won't. And that is to say that, therefore, all the things I've said to you, lesbians shared with gay men all the difficulties, all the oppressions, apart from the fact they could be sent to jail. So it was hard times. But what I believe is that actually lesbians were oppressed and stigmatised and generally suffering in a way that gay men weren't. Because in the 1950s and the 1960s, it was hard being a woman, let alone being a lesbian. Now, if you weren't alive in 1967, who was born in, let's say, 1975 or before? Okay. So when you were born, it was still legal to pay women less than men for doing the same job. Okay? Who was born in 1980 or before? Okay? When you were born, it was not possible for women to apply for a loan or a mortgage in their own names. If you wanted to take out a hire purchase agreement, you had to get your dad or your brother to sign it for you. It was legal until 1981 for a publican to refuse to serve a woman in a bar. 81. Okay? So if you just imagine two young lesbians setting up home together in 1967, right? They're on low pay, they can't afford high rents, they can't get a mortgage because they're women, they can't buy the furniture on the hire purchase unless their dad or their brother wants to do it for them. A lot of them weren't earning very good money anyway, because there were a whole group of lesbians, as you know, who don't want to wear a skirt, and in those days you couldn't get a proper job unless you wore a skirt, so they all worked on forecourts of petrol stations and things so they could wear trousers, and were all earning under their potential. And, well, yeah, basically, even if they wanted to cheer themselves up by going for a drink on a Saturday night, they might not get served in the pub. So what I really want to say is it was a double whammy for lesbians in the 1960s, both as lesbians and as women. And actually, the 1967 Sexual Offences Act did nothing for lesbians except give them a little bit of unwanted media attention. What they were waiting for was another decade away, which was the women's liberation movement, the Sex Equality Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Equal Pay Act. And if you ask an old lesbian over 60 what was the most important Act of Parliament that was passed in 1967, she will probably say the Abortion Act, because actually that was a milestone in women's history, which meant a great deal more to most of us than the 1967 Act. So having stirred that up a bit, I will sit down.
Well, I'd like to start with a couple of stories about lesbian writers in 1967, two of my heroes, what was happening to them as ambassadors of visibility and lesbian cultural representation. And the first of these is Valentine Ackland, who was the lifelong partner of the much more famous writer Sylvia Townsend Warner. Valentine wrote many beautiful love poems to women, and she was herself a very visible 20th century lesbian. She always cross-dressed. She usurped a range of then male privileges, from driving a sports car and shooting a gun to living with a woman and writing erotic poems to her. And back in 1934, Valentine and Sylvia published a book together called Whether a Dove or Seagull, which contained an exchange of love poems between them, a brave thing to do at the time. And they dedicated this book to a poet they both admired but had never met, Robert Frost. And in response, he wrote this to a mutual friend. If you could have got along without 2 or 3 of the more physical poems in the book, you can imagine how philosophically I could. Don't you find the contemplation of their kind of collusion emasculating? I'm chilled to the marrow, as in the actual presence of some foul form of death, where none of me can function. So his anxieties about emasculation may seem quite comic now, but the depth of his disgust and his casual certainty about expressing it and expecting others to share it, I think is still deeply disturbing. So that was in 1934. In 1967, 33 years later, Valentine was 61. She'd been under long-term surveillance by MI5 as a communist, but they also blacklisted her because she was, according to their official reports, abnormal, or in other words, visible. So she hadn't had another book of poems published in all that time. Her promising career as a writer had been effectively blocked, and her strong lesbian voice was silenced. And my second writer of 1967 is Maureen Duffy, who was then in her early 30s. Her pioneering lesbian classic, The Microcosm, had come out the year before. It's a brilliant experimental novel which gave powerful voice to a range of lesbian experience. And the fact that she managed to get this work published by Hutchinson, a mainstream publisher, shows that the times they were a-changing. But one of the great strengths of the book is its unflinching observation of prejudice and punishment. All the lesbians in it face massive social disadvantage, whether they live within the imprisoning safety of a gay ghetto or venture out as themselves into the wider world. But it does have a happy ending. So in 1967, The Microcosm gave lesbians a visibility they hadn't had, for better or worse, since the huge scandal of The Well of Loneliness, almost 40 years earlier, when Radcliffe's Hall book was found obscene, banned, and burnt in the furnaces of Scotland Yard. Thousands of women wrote to Maureen, thanking her, and telling her the book had changed their lives, and given them the courage to live openly, or that they felt liberated just to see their sexuality evoked in print. Writing and publishing this book wasn't an act of professional suicide for Maureen, as it had been for Valentine 30-odd years before, but it wasn't without its risks. Not long after, Maureen was outed by the Daily Mirror. She'd written the photo captions for an art book, and the reviewer strongly objected that the task had been given to a notorious lesbian, as though being a lesbian meant she wasn't qualified to write on any other subject. But enough said, apparently if a publisher gave work to a lesbian writer, they couldn't expect the book to be well received. A lesbian working on a non-lesbian book was not okay. So I think 1967 was a complex, contradictory moment, a time of rapid change and reactionary resistance to it, both extremes. Censorship was under attack, but keeping silence was still a safer option for lesbians, including writers. And that's why becoming visible and speaking out was so brave, a political gesture which refused the easier option of avoiding the subject. By insisting on their own existence and the right to be themselves, lesbians were often presented as society's monsters, the outsider other threatening virtuous women, like the predatory lesbian of Pulp Fiction, or the pathological mental case who needs to be cured by a male psychiatrist with electric shock treatment, if necessary. I was just a small child in 1967, and my mother, who was a writer, had all kinds of friends, gay and straight. She was very young, we lived in Notting Hill Gate, and so everything was bohemian and liberal. So from my own memories, this demonisation or disappearing of lesbians might not have existed, but it certainly did. I'm sure we'll hear many more stories about it today, but I'd just like to finish with a personal one about one of these gay friends, which I heard later. She was a school friend of my mother's, about the same age, and in the 60s she had just started her academic career as a lecturer at French University. So when she got a job in England, she gave in her notice, moved house, and found when she arrived to work that her contract had been cancelled because someone had written anonymously to the professor of her new department saying she was a lesbian. So that was that, no job. Ooh.
Lesbian ghosts in the house.
And this guy didn't have to justify it in any way or prove it was true. The fact it had been said was enough to make her unfit for the job, and she had no legal grounds to complain of being fired for that reason. And it was many years before her career began to recover when she married a gay man who'd also had awkward questions asked at work, a mutually beneficial arrangement. And I spoke to her yesterday on the phone, and I was asking her if it was okay to tell this story. And she told me that it was very convenient because her husband was a musician, and he played the piano at the gateways for their Christmas carol service. Picture. So it's a tale of prejudice, discrimination, and being made to vanish. But luckily, she only had to be invisible at work. Otherwise, she was what the Daily Mirror would have called a notorious lesbian. But it's an example of how the boundaries were, and to an extent still are, policed by all kinds of institutions, and how the most brave and forthright women were forced to compromise out of financial need, or to protect their loved ones, or for 100 other reasons, and how they managed to stay visible anyway, and inspiring still today. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry
Jane's got a
to come
PS.
back again, but something Francis has just said reminded me so strongly. We were actually those women that wrote to Maureen Duffy because in '67, my partner and I, we'd been together about 3 years, were living in a little student flat somewhere. We knew no other lesbians. This is the other thing I want to say about the 1960s. It was so hard to find each other. There was no diva, there was no gaydar girls, there was no gay press, there was nothing. And there wasn't the internet, and there weren't smartphones either. So it was very, very difficult. And one day my partner came home with this copy of the Microcosm. And she said, look, it's a book about lesbians. And we read it. To bits. And then she said, you know what, I'm going to write to this woman. So we wrote to Maureen Duffy. And Maureen, God bless her heart, and it was 50 years before I could thank her properly, wrote back and said, well, it's very difficult, but there are two things you could do. You could subscribe to a new magazine, which has just been founded, called Arena 3, which used to come out in a plain brown envelope, run off one of those Banda machine things. Or you could go to London, is it far from where you live, and you could go down the Gateways Club, and that was how we started our lesbian lives. So thank you, Maureen Duffy. Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you so much, all three of you. And that's just really, really illuminating, isn't it? To have three very different examinations, really, of our lives since 1967. Have people got burning questions? Oh, great, yeah, we have. Go.
Jane, you mentioned Arena 3.
Yes.
And that came about because there was a magazine article called A Brief Look at the Lesbians, which I think they commissioned 3 or 4 journalists to write, and only one found anything to say. And so it's kind of a reaction to that Arena 3 appeared. And actually, I think if married women wanted to subscribe to it, they had to have their husband's permission, so that the publishers wouldn't get sued in divorce proceedings.
Yes, you could be sued for alienation of affection.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right, and also it's very difficult to circulate Arena 3 because the newspapers wouldn't take advertising that mentioned the L word. So I'm doing some work on Arena 3 at the moment. Can you and I have a chat afterwards? Brilliant, thank you.
Fantastic. So, again, either questions or observations? If not, I've got a question for all three of you that relates back to an event within Homotopia this year. I don't want to hog this, so please, if you've got something you want to say now, but come back later. Last week, Homotopia showed the killing of Sister George, and it was quite a contentious screening, which I think is the role of festivals. I think they should cause a row, I really do. So Homotopia, very successful again. But two of you mentioned Gateways, which was a club for lesbians in London that is featured in the killing of Sister George. I would love to know what you feel about that film and its portrayal of lesbians at that time. Whether you remember that time or not.
I remember that time very well. I used to go to the Gateway, and it was mind-blowing because I didn't know of a gay club. Well, I knew of a gay club, but not just for women only and that. And I don't really know how to describe it, because I know I walked around with my eyes wide open and my mouth most probably open as well, because there were so many different women, different age groups, all that one. And I was quite shocked. And I remember going to the toilet, and it was like them cubicles, a long line of maybe 3 or 4. And you'd hear the other girls outside having a chat or trying to cop off, things like that. And when I came out, I got a lot of stares. Especially in the club itself, because I don't recall seeing another black woman in there.
That's right.
And, you know, so I was lucky.
What do you think of the film? Have you seen the film?
I saw it when it first came out, I think. I know it was years ago. I can't remember it that much. Well, I think the attitude, whoever directed it, must, well, you know, where did they get the information from and that? Who were they, you know, who were they getting stories from and all that one? I don't even know who wrote the film, or if it was a play.
It was a play first. It was written by a gay man, and
gay man, eh?
I think so. And
Here we are
certainly he was a
again.
man. I think he was a gay man. And basically, we all went to see it, didn't we, in 1968? Because you never saw any lesbians in the cinema, and you went in the cinema thinking, "Oh my God, somebody will see me," and the whole cinema was full of people going, "Oh my God." But actually, you know, you went, and we went there because the Gateways was in it, and you could recognise the Gateways. And of course, when they did the scenes in the Gateways, they had the real people who went there for dancing, etc. They all had enormous sunglasses on, or woolly hats pulled down over their heads, because they wanted to be in the film, but they couldn't quite come out. They couldn't quite do it. So you were all the time looking on the screen, thinking, "Oh, that's so and so," and I think that's so and so. That was one of the reasons you went. Saw it again recently. My God, it's an awful film.
It's so offensive
Oh,
to women.
it's appalling.
It's
It's appalling.
What was offensive about it?
Well, go on.
No, you
Go on,
no,
go
you
on.
say you first, then
Well,
I'll follow.
first of all, it's not a very good film as a film. You know, it's
Story.
pretty rubbish. But the story is about lesbians are sadistic, predatory, middle-aged, neurotic,
abusive relationships. Their relationships are bound to be abusive, power relationships.
Yes,
all that.
Just absolutely horrible.
I mean, I saw it quite recently, and I actually couldn't believe it. You know,
But what is even worse is that was 1968. 30 or 40 years later, they're still doing it, because you're going to see Notes on a Scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
predatory, middle-aged, neurotic, menopausal lesbian.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
We haven't got there yet, have we?
I thought it was really important that it was shown, because it's one of the few
Yeah.
documents of any kind.
Yes.
But what value would the three of you take as any value that film has as a document of the time? Is there anything you'd take from it?
Well, you know what I take from it? I can remember when I first came out, and you were either butch or you were femme. And I think what it was, until it was, I was going to say popular, being gay, being a lesbian. But back then, you see, you didn't know, you know, how did we dress? How do you dress when you're a lesbian? And because you were classified in the lesbian world, you're either butch or you're femme.
True.
So couples, one would dress like a man and one would dress like a woman. I knew lesbians who used to use, what's that aftershave from the 60s and 70s? Brute, that was it. They'd use that as a perfume. They'd have a gold ring with a black onyx in it, and that was to let you know that they were gay. So it was like, and I say we because I was in that category as well. You know, we were dying to be who we were, and we wanted other people to know who we were or what we were like, what we done and all that. But you had to do it in a really sort of, not secretive way, but you were undercover because you didn't know what would happen. You'd have, you know, just in the way of clubs in Liverpool in the 70s, the police would go round the block, especially where the Lisbon was, and they'd have a spotlight and they'd shine it on the gays when they came out. There'd be straight people maybe waiting there to spit at you or call you a dyke or things like that. Go, yeah, I'm a dyke. That's the way it was. But I think at that time, women at that time coming out or even just being gay, it made you stronger. You either fell down with the chance or anything, or it made you strong. You'd be like, yeah, and you know. So it was, and it took, I reckon, at least 10 years before you didn't dress a particular way to show that you were a lesbian. You know, it was a bit like a uniform. I saw it as. I did myself. In fact, I when I was a kid in this homes, you know, I think it was about 8, and I asked for a pair of jeans for Christmas, and I got them as well. Nobody else, no girls had them in them.
Oh, that's the other thing, of course. In the 1950s and early 60s, women didn't wear trousers. Think how difficult that was. It was true though, wasn't it? Yeah.
One of the film stars did. What's her name from the 40s?
Oh, Marlena
Dietrich, yeah. She done it. She was out.
You remind me when you say that about coming out of the clubs to the spotlights and things. We were very butch and femme, and I was very femme in those days, and we would come out the gateways and we'd all had a lot to drink, and I hadn't because I was driving. And I remember one day I came out and I was waiting for my 2 girlfriends to come, and I was just stood on the pavement on my own, and a policeman came up to me and he said, "Are you all right, miss?" And I said, "Yes, thank you." And he said, "I wouldn't hang around here on your own if I were you. You get some very funny people just here." And then of course they came out and got in my car. Yeah.
Do people have things they'd like to? Yeah, great.
I was just going to say, when you said about the Abortion Act and some of the other laws that have sort of come through to help women, I still think that we're quite a way off sort of women's rights in lots of other areas of the world. And you can see, like with Australia, with the Gay Marriage Act and everything coming through now. Just in terms of like, and even in Ireland, like abortion is still illegal. We get all the ladies coming over from there, and it's dangerous to their health to be coming over for like a day pass and everything just to have the procedure and everything. But I think in terms of like women's rights and the legal aspect, what other sort of things do you think, and for everybody, what do you think will push on women's rights? Is it the legal proceedings or is it other actions? What do you think will improve that in time? What's the quickest way about it?
I think women just get on with it anyway. I was really aware when I came out, all the young gay boys who were on the street and doing all kinds of things, but gay women got a job, they got a flat and just got on with it. It was a big deal on a personal level, but you know, they weren't walking the streets or anything like that. So I think you've just got to, I think women are that strong that they can carry on and find the next sort of way of life that they're going to choose themselves. You know, we women from, I don't know how, forever I suppose, have been so put down and made to feel inferior and all that one. I think, like today's young people especially, you know, they know what they want and they get on and do it, and they're dead strong on what they believe and what they want to do and all things like that. Whereas there was like a big black cloud over you when you were, well, a woman, mine being gay as well, back then, about what your life was like. You know, so I think today's young lesbians are gonna turn the whole thing round.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right.
I am right, I know I am.
I think political awareness is the most important thing for women, and I think that, I remember maybe it was 10 years ago, we went to Pride in London, and hadn't been for a few years. When we used to go in the 80s, when we walked past the end of Downing Street, it was all Maggie, 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 out, 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 and all of that, you know. And we walked past the end of Downing Street and nobody said anything. It's just like we just floated past, and like, oh, everything's fine, you know, we're having a lovely parade, you know, aren't we lucky, we're gay and we're allowed to be out here and everything. And I was a bit taken aback, and I think it's so great that now it's turned round again, and obviously the problems facing us are huge and are going to get worse. I mean, Trump and Brexit, you know, let's not kind of even go there. We'll go. But I think that it's fantastic that young people are so much more politically aware, and also, especially lesbians, gay people, and so on, because it's not like we can just relax and think we've got there and everything's going to be fine. I think we have to be very, very vigilant to make sure that the distance we've got, we keep. Because in an awful lot of areas, as the swing to the right happens, like in Russia, very, very scary things are happening to gay people. And we just need to be really, really alert to it all.
And our questioner's right, we actually haven't got there yet. Because in spite of all the laws and the talk and that, there is still a gender pay gap. You know, women do not earn as much money as men. And we had a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, the day on which you stop work because for the rest of the year you're not being paid. My particular thing about sexism at the moment, and you can tell why looking at me, is the place where sexism and ageism cross. Because that's really toxic. You know, you think you're a second-class citizen as a woman, you think you're being ignored, until you become an old woman. And then you're really ignored, or you're patronised. You're good sweetheart, or darling, or love. You know, and I'm at the point where I want to be helped across the road, I will ask. But I think that whole thing, you know, and the women's movement hasn't been wonderful about ageism either. So there's you know, lots of battles to fight, I'm glad to say.
I'm so sorry, we're coming to the end of our time here. So I'm obviously going to say some thank yous, but before I say the thank yous, I'm actually going to set you a task. So this Homotopia is going to set you some homework. Okay, some of you are already doing it. I know lots of faces in this room because I'm lucky enough to see you all at lots of different events. And I know that people are starting to affect change in Liverpool in lots of different ways, whether through supporting people who are seeking asylum here in Liverpool, whether they're starting a new cultural organisation, looking at queer people, whether you're starting a club night, whether you are a musician or a performer, whether you are a writer, or whether you are an audience, because we're the audience and we're important too. So your task is to go and do what Sandi said, which is go out there and get on with changing things. So there's a little task for you. But there you go, homework. And obviously I will be marking your homework, and at Homotopia next year, I'm going to be sure we'll be giving you some marks of what you did in the year to come. But I would really love to say some thank yous. Thank you to the venue. Thank you to the wonderful Barbara Brownskirt who brought us here. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our speakers, Sandi, Jane and Francis. and I hope you will carry on the conversations. Does the bus come back? You can get up on the bus, and then I'll hand over to Shah, and she will tell you how you can carry on this conversation. There's lots of conversations to be had and lots of work to be done. Thank you very much. It's